Game of Thrones doesn't excite anyone, but apparently flying cars does. So we're in the right spot. We have the right group of people here. Sebastian, thanks so much for coming back to Disrupt. You are pretty sure part of the Disrupt family now. I think you've been on stage more times than I have.
I love this conference, and it's so great to see such a great audience today.
Yeah, he's telling you to applaud. He loves the audience.
I should applaud.
All right. All right, well, as Jordan mentioned, 2 years ago, you were on our stage, and you brought the puppy in a baby Bjorn on stage, right? And but at that time, you said that flying cars will be the hot new thing. And I've been covering bold predictions like this for a long time. And here's how it looks to me. A lot of companies are pursuing flying cars now, but it doesn't appear that we're any closer to getting people in these vehicles. Am I wrong about that?
Look, any technology, specifically hardware, takes a while, right? You want to make sure it's really, really, really safe. But that doesn't deter us from the vision to understand that if we take daily traffic from the ground a few hundred feet up in the air, we could literally free the world from traffic. We have technology that can get you from here to San Jose in 15 minutes, from here to UC Berkeley in like 4 minutes. So now the onus is to really make it safe, work the regulatory difficulties and challenges, find a way to operate them safely, and then get social acceptance and see if we can change the world.
But what about autonomous vehicles? That used to be a thing, or your thing at least. What happened with autonomous vehicles? Are you over that now?
I'm not working on it myself. I would say the vehicles we built are also autonomous. They're just a bit higher up in the air. And if you go a bit higher in the air, then all the difficulties with not hitting stuff like children and bicycles and cars and so on just vanishes.
Just buildings, maybe, right?
Yeah, go above the buildings, go above the trees, like go where the helicopters are.
Okay.
And I think when there are vehicles that do this, they're called helicopters, they're just incredibly noisy. And they're typically incredibly expensive, they're for rich people. Napa last year illegalized personalized helicopter flights for the reason they're too noisy. So one of the big questions for us has been, can we make them quiet?
So I think it's important at this point to explain. Tell me what a flying car is. How is that different from a plane? Because we like to throw these words around, but it's not really clear.
Yeah, it's not a car. And I personally don't like the word flying car, but it's very catchy. The technical term is called eVTOL. These are typically electrically propelled vehicles. They can take off and land vertically. It's eVTOL, it's vertical takeoff landing. So you don't need an airport. And then they fly very much like a regular plane. Okay,
so I want to do a poll really quickly. How many people here think that flying cars, even though we don't like that term, but flying cars are going to be here in 20 years, either in San Francisco or... Okay, now, what about in 10 years? Okay, what about in 5 years? Fewer hands, but yeah. Is your hand up for 5 years?
I happily lived it for 5 years. I'm super impatient. I've flown one.
Well, okay, the company that you're running is one of, as I mentioned earlier, one of many flying car companies that have emerged in the past few years. And I'm wondering what Kitty Hawk is optimizing for. What are you going to do to survive?
Well, it's a wide open market. It's way too early to call a winner. We focus foremost, of course, on safety, like everybody else, there's no question. Secondly, on noise, to be honest. We feel that for this to be acceptable, it has to be basically imperceptible, has to be able to not disrupt you. And I even find drones noisy, to be honest. They're way too noisy. They're annoying. So I want to be so quiet like the wind.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up because Kitty Hawk has actually 3 vehicles. We know of 2. One is the Flyer and one is Cora. But a week ago, I got a chance to see a secret project that you've been working on for a couple of years that's called Heavyside. And it is quiet. So tell me, what is Heavyside? And once you finish describing it, I think we have a video we'll show. But why don't you kick things off? What is Heavyside?
Heavyside is a project led by Damon van der Lind, a genius engineer. And it's a mixture between a fixed-wing aircraft and a drone. It takes off like a drone. The noise level is like a leaf blower. It's not super quiet. But the moment it goes into forward flight, it becomes super quiet and super efficient. Just last week, we were able to fly this vehicle over a distance over 102 miles total, with 30% reserve still in the batteries. So it's, for me, an existence proof, a prototype that shows that the technology is generally feasible.
So does anyone want to see it? Should we show the video? All right, let's show the video. This is what Kitty Hawk's been working on. And so I can't say where, as we wait for the video to come up, I can't say where it was, but I do know that it was complicated for me to get there.
Yeah.
And we did a little bit of a test. We compared the noise of a helicopter to the heavy side.
Yeah.
And let's see, are we showing it?
No.
All right, here we go.
Project Heaviside is Kitty Hawk's latest electric VTOL vehicle. It is fast, small, and exceedingly quiet. Heaviside is 100 times quieter than a regular helicopter. Introducing Heaviside. We're building the future without adding in the noise.
Cool.
Thank you.
So I didn't have that soundtrack when I got to see it, but I can say that it was quite quiet, and it was quieter than a helicopter, and we had a decibel meter in hand to measure, and there was sound.
There was sound, yeah. You saw it at 600 feet. When it goes to like 1,500 feet, it's literally as quiet as it gets. So 38 decibels in comparison. If you step out in San Francisco, the city is about 70 decibels. And if you are next to Google and there's no car coming by, it's 50 decibels. And if you climb Mount Whitney, it's about 40 decibels. So that's roughly the noise levels.
Okay, so when are we going to see this? When is this going to be publicly available?
Well, you just made it public. This very moment.
Well, okay. When are we going to be able to either buy it or ride in it?
Yeah, so there's hurdles. There is a regulatory hurdle. The FAA is very open-minded. We've just hired as a part-time advisor the former administrator from the FAA, Mike Huerta, who's assisting us navigating this. The general question is, what would happen if there's like 10,000 holes in the air? How do we keep the air safe? And what will pilots do? Who will operate those? And how do you make sure they don't bump into each other? And then there's a general question of societal acceptance. We want this technology to be for everybody. We want it to be available for everybody, not just for rich people. Ideally, it becomes some sort of an air taxi system that you go to your phone and you summon the Kitty Hawk app, and up comes your Heaviside or your Cora or your Flyer, and you hop in and you go where you want to go.
So the Heaviside just fits one person. I was able to sit in it. Some of it, the interface was not in there. But I'm wondering how do you really actually make this not just for the super rich? Because it's quite stunning. It's beautiful. I'm trying to imagine how you get the cost down. You mentioned through some sort of shared network, but really, how are you going to do that? I mean, what would the cost potentially be?
Yeah, so there's the today and then there's the tomorrow.
All right.
Today, obviously, this thing is incredibly expensive, and we're funding it with Larry's money and other money. From the cost perspective, there's the vehicle itself, and it weighs maybe a third or a quarter of a car. And it should, in principle, be not more expensive per pound than a car when mass manufactured. From the energy side, almost all the energy is being used for drag and not for lift. Lift is this thing that keeps you up here. That's the extra price you pay for having not wheels and being on the ground. But drag is the energy you use to combat the air. Because we can go on a straight line, we believe it will be roughly a third of the energy cost per mile as a Tesla.
As a Tesla?
As a Tesla, yeah.
Okay.
And Tesla is very efficient.
So what do you envision for this system, specifically with the heavy side, within a city, let's say like San Francisco, where we are today? Do you see this as a commuter vehicle, solely as a commuter vehicle, whereas the Flyer and Cora have different use cases?
Yeah, so I mean, from a specs perspective, range, say 100 miles plus reserves, let's say about 10 times as fast as ground transportation. The average car is about 16, 18 miles per hour. So you can go from here, as I mentioned, to Berkeley in a few minutes. I would imagine there's utility. That I hope all of you, when you're stuck in traffic, remember this little presentation this morning and imagine what you could do if you just fly up a few feet. How cool that would be. So then the question really is, how do we get it safely integrated? And there's obviously work to be done. People talk of vertiports. Ideally, I would love to be able to land in any street corner. That's going to be tricky today, in part because there's also these overhead wires and so on. So there's some work that has to be done to integrate this new modality into our lives. But look, 100 years ago, we were all about horses, right? And then the car 120 years ago, and then someone invented the car, and all of a sudden, I think New York City flipped from all horses to all cars within 20 or 30 years. And then we built paved roads, and we built gas stations and garages and so on. So when there's a fundamentally better capability to get ourselves around, I think we're going to find ways to use it.
So do you envision being able to walk out on a street corner, like you said, and have an app and hail it? Or do you see this more as central points, hubs, if you will, where you go and that's where you pick up your heavy side?
With all three projects, Flyer, Core, and Heavy Side, we want to build an air taxi system. And I believe an air taxi system is better because it gets much higher utilization per vehicle. It pains me that I walk on the street in San Francisco and there's so many parked cars. What an amazing waste. And even today with Getaround and Uber and Lyft, we are now beginning to use cars more efficiently. With self-driving cars, we can do this even more efficiently with Waymo and Aptiv and these companies. And with flying cars, there's no exception. I believe if we can share those as an air taxi system, the cost per mile can go to something like 30 cents per mile eventually, which is going to halve as car ownership.
What's the big challenge then? I mean, you mentioned regulations. I mean, is that it? Is that the last?
It's a big one. The FAA has been entrusted by Congress to manage the national airspace, and it's basically anything that you can't reach with your hand on the ground. In the past, there has been at most 6, 7, 8 vehicles in an area at the same time. If you look up here, we are between 3 major airports. You're going to see at most 10 aircraft. Now, not just us, Amazon, Project Wing, and Google come along and say, how about 10,000? It turns out there's no technology today that could manage 10,000 vehicles safely yet, according to the standards that the FAA wants to see. And we all know that accidents in aviation are much more tragic in some way than accidents on the ground. So the trick is going to be to work with authorities, with other technology companies, to really redesign and redefine how we manage airspace. I'm hopeful because the sky is empty. You can look up and there's nothing there. So the capability is there. We have the highways. We have the volume. It's just a way to work with the government, with authorities to find ways to manage it responsibly.
So you mentioned that former FAA Administrator Mike Huerta, who was there for 5 years, is going to be advising you. So is he going to be directly working with the FAA in terms of helping craft rules around this, or for the industry as a whole? Or is his role going to be more about just helping Kitty Hawk? I mean, what is his role over there?
For the time being, he's just helping us. There's a limit as to what he can do when he just left the FAA. But overall, what I really see is it's a broad dialogue. We talk to the FAA almost daily. We're talking to the New Zealand equivalent, to CAA, almost daily. And I can tell you, at the core of the conversation is a 100% compliance and interest. Both the FAA and us want to be safe. It doesn't help either them or us if what we build is unsafe. And both of us want to be innovative, turns out. Every person that I meet in the government wants to drive the company forward, has a vision for the company. The difference is we are technologists, so we can build technology, but we don't have the same skill set as the FAA. We don't have the same experience. As you might have heard, we've recently started a strategic partnership with Boeing and Cora, specifically to bring in a 103-year-old incredibly experienced company to assist us in making this technology safe and safely go to the market. To me, this is a great opportunity for dialogue. I've done the same for self-driving cars before. My team started all the legislative work in Nevada, in California, in Florida, other places. We found the DMV, the CHP, all these institutions incredibly forward-looking and incredibly thoughtful, and this will be no exception.
You mentioned air traffic control, and I'm wondering what sort of innovation, do you see that as something becoming more automated? Because there is pressure on the people who do air traffic control.
Yeah, so I'm a pilot myself. I would say the interaction with ATC, while it's safe, is incredibly cumbersome. There's very obvious way to automate things. When you think about flight as the future, one of the nice things is we can actually instrument every flying vehicle with a transponder. We can't do the same on the ground. We can't instrument every cat and every dog with a transponder, but in the air we can do this. So we can conceivably have a situation where we know where everybody is and where everybody is going. And that is a technology that is imminently doable, right? Today we have multiple billions of cell phones that report where they are, so we know where our cell phones are. It's not that hard to imagine we do the same 400 or 500 feet up in the air. And once that happens, I would believe that aviation will become an automated field. I would believe that you don't want to all fly manually, you want to be flown. You don't want to be pilots, and you don't want to be in a sea of 10,000 aircraft at the same time. You want to just be flown. And the technology for flying, autonomous flying, is so much easier than for self-driving cars. I actually believe you're going to be done with self-flying vehicles long before we're done with self-driving cars.
Okay, that's a bold prediction, and we'll have to revisit that when we, maybe in a couple of years or something.
2 years from now.
When do you think that that's going to be achieved? I mean, not just talking about Kitty Hawk, but being able to achieve what you just laid out.
I think the best progress we've seen so far is actually in the country of New Zealand, where we've been working for 3 years with Cora and now working alongside Boeing, where the regulators have put forward a specific path towards remotely piloted air taxi systems, first for recreational use and thereafter for commercial use. And the timeline right now is in the order of 3 to 5 years. But there's a specific path of requirements that are now laid out, which really helps. In the US, many companies are talking to the FAA. There's a lot of interest. We're not quite as advanced yet. But then also the US is much, much, much bigger.
Right. One of the things you were talking about earlier was, how you see all these parked cars and that's sort of a waste, and then you look up in the skies and there's all this opportunity. Aren't we going to just be taking, if you're successful and if other companies are successful, aren't we just taking the congestion that we have on the streets and just lifting it up and putting it into the sky?
Yeah, that's where the cool stuff comes in. 1D versus 3D, okay? So for the non-mathematical people, on 101, you have like 4 lanes and you're cramped into 4 lanes. And if you want to make 8 lanes, that's going to be a $100 billion effort per mile or something like this. In the sky, if you want to add 100 vertical lanes, that's a software fix. You recompile, right? You can make as many lanes this way and as many lanes this way as you want. So on the ground, if 2 cars approach an intersection, one has to stop, call a stop sign or a traffic light. In the sky, you can just do that. So the volume of 3D is so much bigger, even if all of us were in the sky all the time. And now add to this the following. With the Heaviside project, we're literally 10 times as fast, which means your time in the sky would be 1/10 of what it would be on the ground. If today you could take 9, 10, 90% of the cars away, there wouldn't be any congestion. So to me, from the math perspective, this is a very solvable problem.
Solvable, but it will definitely change the skylines. I mean, San Francisco will look completely different than it has ever looked before.
Yeah, and how cool would that be? I mean, if you could just hop into something and fly over to Berkeley in a few minutes or to San Francisco airport in like 2 minutes, as opposed to being stuck in traffic, wouldn't that be cool? We believe that the typical American worker commutes for about something like 238 or so hours a year, okay? If we can get this to 23 hours, wouldn't that be cool? Give you back like 200 hours of commute time.
So do you think people are willing to give up maybe how they see their cities today and then replace it with, maybe filling it with a lot of Heavisides?
Yeah, so let me ask the audience, if I could give you a vehicle for the same cost of a car that gets you around 10 times as fast, and you're in the air, you can look down, and it's safe, who would use it? Okay, and who would not use it? One.
I see one hand.
Okay, good. Wise man. Good.
I know his
Maybe you
name.
walk to work.
All right, we're out of time, but I do have one question for you. So you're often on the cutting edge of technology, and you've been a part of X and Google Self-Driving Project. And Kitty Hawk, in fact, has been is backed by Google co-founder Larry Page. So I'm wondering, when you and Larry get together and you brainstorm, what do you dream of building or solving that you haven't already?
Oh my God. So right now, I can tell you I'm 100% committed to making the flying car a reality. I think it's going to be not just a massive business, it's going to be a massive benefit to society to be able to get around much faster. I have no plans past this, to be honest.
Okay.
I'm gonna be
So
stuck with
2
this
years
for a
from now,
while.
when you're back on stage, we're going to be talking about flying cars. Maybe we'll have one on stage.
Absolutely, you bet.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you, Kristen.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.